Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name's Tina and I'm the Capability Building Coordinator for Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. I'd like to welcome you all to the webinar, How to Choose the Right IT Hardware for Your Not-for-Profit, which will be presented by James O'Callaghan from Info Exchange. We'll start with a bit of housekeeping. All lines are muted, so if you have any questions during the session, please type it in the questions box on your webinar panel and James will answer them throughout and at the end of the webinar. Please note that your comments and questions will not appear to the entire group. If you have any technical issues, please also type it in the questions box and I'll try my best to help you out with those as well. Please note that if you are on a Wi-Fi connection and have multiple programs open, this can sometimes affect the quality of the audio and video of the webinar. If possible, please close all other programs to help you have the best experience possible today. Before we start, I'd also like to remind you that the webinar is being recorded and a link to the recording will be sent to you all within a week after the webinar ends. So you'll be able to access that through your account at any given time. That's all from me for now. So I'll pass this over to James to get things started.
Yes, thank you, Tina, for the introduction. My name is James and I'll be taking you through today's webinar, How to Choose the Right IT Hardware for Your Not-for-Profit. A little about me, I guess, to get us started. I've been working with Info Exchange now for about 5 years, initially starting as a support engineer, so working, I guess, in the front line, in managed support. So we have a lot of clients, not-for-profits. We specifically work with other not-for-profits and we manage a lot of their sort of IT. So have a pretty good understanding of some of the pitfalls, I guess, with hardware, whether it be purchasing new or even reusing some old. So hopefully throughout today, you'll be able to take something away as far as what to sort of look for and I guess to make the process of purchasing hardware that little bit easier. So I guess we'll just delve right in. Firstly, I guess Info Exchange is a not-for-profit ourselves, and I sort of mentioned earlier again that we specifically work with other not-for-profits. We're quite proud of the relationships we had, even with Connecting Up and some of the organisations you see here on the page. Today's agenda will start with, I guess, common sort of not-for-profit technology. We'll delve into some sort of sample use cases. So really that's just around, what devices might work best for particular roles in the organization. We generally don't look at hardware for the specific user or the individual. It's more of a role-based look at it all and what sort of, I guess, hardware would suit what particular roles. But again, we'll delve into that. We'll discuss, gauging needs. So exactly, depending on what you're doing in the organization, what sort of hardware you might need there. The whole desktop versus laptop, and when to purchase either one of those. Generally, if you're mobile, if you're in a lot of meetings and maybe doing some outreach, obviously would look at sort of more of a laptop type scenario. Whereas if you are based in the office and doing some sort of standard admin, whether that be finance or something like that, we would recommend looking at sort of a desktop type solution. There's a number of reasons for that, which we will delve into. Choosing the right operating system. Look, a lot of this comes down to look and feel, but we'll discuss that again in more detail. Now, this will be a little bit of a technical component, the hardware components of a device. I don't want to spend too much time on this because it can get very technical, but really this is more around, what does it all mean when you look at the specs of a computer and understanding what each of the those specs are basically and what that may mean to you. We'll delve into software, so we'll talk about, again, the operating system, but we'll also talk about some of what we call the SOE, which is the standard operating environment. So the very basics of what software you would need to work on a day-to-day basis within the organization. We'll talk about peripherals. These are the things that you plug into the device. So one thing to take note of, you might be buying a laptop, but you would be basing yourself in the office at times. You'd need to think about having a dock so that you might have a second screen. You might want another keyboard. You might look for speakers and things like that, depending on what you're looking at. Even external hard drives and things like that for backing up. Purchasing tips. So again, things to look out for, and hopefully after the hardware component, you'll sort of make that. It'll be a little bit easier, I guess, for you to break that down. And replacement strategy. So the life cycle of a computer and how all that works. Generally, when a computer gets between 3 and 4, I guess, years old, the maintenance of that device actually can become more costly than actually going out and purchasing a new device that generally comes with a 3-year next business day warranty, for example. So if anything happened in that period, it could be either fixed or replaced for free. Top tips. We'll discuss that towards the end. So just to jump straight in again, the types of PCs commonly used by not-for-profits. This was a survey that we did in partnership with Connecting Up, and you'll notice here straight away that desktops in this 12-month period had increased by 5%. Now, our thinking at this stage is that the desktops are a little cheaper to purchase. Has a lot to do with, I guess, the components, and that manufacturing these devices has become a lot easier. Laptops have dropped, as you can see there, by about 3%, which was interesting to us. We think this has a lot to do with the introduction of cloud-based technologies. So where now you can access documents on the fly using smartphones and things like that, where you can again see in that slide that the smartphones have increased sort of 5% as well. Tablet devices, again, a sort of a shock to us that the tablets had dropped a little. I think you'll find though that this may be on the increase in the next 12 months, and other devices there, an increase of 3%. So yeah, just a very interesting look at, I guess, the trends in the not-for-profit sector around hardware, and again, we'll delve more into maybe the reasons why a little further when we discuss each individual sort of what we call the use case. So key principles of hardware selection. Supportability. So when we talk about supportability, we talk about, I guess, consistency. So generally, when you're looking to purchase devices for an organization, it's good to be consistent. So having the similar devices for some of the similar roles in the organization. Now, again, I've mentioned we'll talk about standard operating environments and things like that, but it's also, supportability also delves into things like training. So if one individual was using one computer and then moving to another the other day, for example, then as far as the training is concerned, they'll be able to jump straight onto that device and should be able to use that device as efficiently as the other or the old. Cost efficient. So yes, all hardware will be chosen to maximize the value and create the best return on investment for the purchase over the life of the equipment. So again, it comes down to that use case, and again, we will be covering that. But it's, there's no point buying a device that has all the most expensive components in it, but the job that you're doing is really just proposal writing, and it's using very limited resources for you to achieve that result. So it's about weighing up, I guess, what device may be needed for each role and being as cost effective in that process as possible. Reliability. Reliability. So generally, when we're purchasing devices for an organization or an enterprise organization, it's best to get, I guess, business machines. Generally, these machines in their manufacturing and testing have been through some more stringent testing with their components because an enterprise level machine is going to be on for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Um, there's generally better test or stress testing on these devices than some of the other cheaper ones that you can get, or consumer grade devices that you can get from places like JB um, hardware and such. Familiar and easy to use. So I think I've sort of touched on that again. It's around having consistency across the organisation and it being familiar to use and comes into training. So gathering your requirements. So again, going back, what is the purpose of the device? Are you crunching large amounts of data, or are you writing out proposals? Is it for home use, business purposes? Does the computer need to be mobile? These are all the sorts of questions you should be asking yourself before you even look into what computer you're going to buy, whether that be desktop or laptop. It's all about, what are you doing with the machine, and I think the sooner you can understand that, I think you'll start to really move away from some of the pitfalls around not only cost but also, I guess, just how responsive the PC might be, depending on certain tasks, I guess, that the machines are taking. I mentioned earlier about use cases. This is an example of a use case. So this is an office-based admin worker. You can see that, in this example, we're looking at a desktop computer. So again, this individual in this scenario isn't really leaving the office too much, doesn't need mobility, in their device, and I guess that being said, it's best to go a desktop because of the price point mainly. If they don't need all of those, if they don't need all of those features or the ability to move around, then 9 times out of 10, a desktop device is going to be your cheapest option, and also. Generally speaking, some of the components in a desktop device can be a little bit more high end. And then there's the other side of that, which is maintenance. You can replace, a hard drive easily or RAM easily in a desktop to sort of upgrade them. Whereas sometimes some of the laptops, particularly Mac, are very difficult to upgrade. They've been locked down. You would need to go to the Apple Store to get things like RAM replaced these days. Look, just another consideration. To tell you the truth, the example model we've got here, look, I don't think you'd need an i7. I think you could drop back to an i5. We'll discuss, the I's a little bit later in the presentation. But again, if it's not sort of labor intensive, you could sort of skint, I guess, a little on the i side. This is the processor. The i7 here is the type of processor, but I will delve into more about that in the hardware component of today's webinar. One example, so the office-based admin worker. Another example here is the mobile support worker. Now, this could be anyone from doing outreach for the organisation. Someone obviously who's a little bit more mobile. This is again just an example. It's a laptop here, obviously, and we touched on peripherals earlier, and we will again. But it's also good to consider that you might spend $1,245 here as an example on this laptop, but if you're going to be in the office and sitting at your desk, the chances are you're probably going to want to purchase an extra monitor you would need a dock then to plug that device into that monitor. And an external mouse. It can be very difficult using the touchpad on a laptop for long periods of time. It's always better to ergonomically to use a wireless mouse, for example. So there's always sometimes some hidden costs. You think you're buying a computer and that's it. Well, there's actually some extra hardware that may be needed. Now, you may have also have noticed the warranty and lifespan of these devices. Now, a desktop computer is generally we feel the lifespan of a desktop computer is a little bit longer than that of a laptop. Now, the main reason for that is that the desktop, again, is standalone in the office. It's not being moved around, so it's not being bumped and things like that. But there is a high chance of dropping these devices too. So generally, we say that a desktop computer would actually last a little longer in its life cycle than a laptop machine. So something else to consider when you're making the choice on a computer here. What have you got? So high mobile managers. So these are the individuals that are in and out of meetings, that are traveling across the country to other offices or clients. So these are the individuals that really need the flexibility and lightweight option for their computing needs. So this example is a Surface Pro. That's my recommendation on a tablet, but I'm a little biased, I guess. I'm a Windows operator, I guess, in some respects. So I would tend to move towards a Surface, but there are other tablets out there in the marketplace, and it doesn't need to be a tablet. It could be as you say, a sort of an ultrabook here, which again is a lighter weight option to the laptop that we were just discussing with that mobile user. You'll see straight away the cost estimate for a device like this is expensive. So another thing is you wouldn't be rolling this out to every individual in the organization. Look, you might have the budget for that, but again, it goes back to that cost efficiency. Does everyone really need this device in their day-to-day activity? The other thing to point out here is, again, back on the peripherals. Now, this particular device, the Microsoft Surface Pro, these peripherals are quite expensive. So once you factor in an external monitor and a dock, a mouse and the stylus, I think the stylus alone is about $200. So you really need to weigh up whether this is the right device for the role or the individual in that role. But just some sort of indicative costing there as well, but certainly a more expensive option and not one that you'd give to every individual in the organization. And the caseworker. This is another option, I guess, of a tablet device. This is the what am I saying? The iPad. So yeah, look, another thing I guess the biggest thing here, we've sort of touched on it with the Surface, but for the mobile caseworker, one thing to consider with these devices is how you're accessing the internet. So you'll notice here in the example model, so it's an iPad Pro 12.9 inch. That's the screen size. It's Wi-Fi and cellular. So basically, the cellular, is very much like your mobile phone. So it has a port that you can plug in a SIM card that then handles your data. So you may not always have access to a wireless network. Now I understand most people have their iPhones or smartphones, these days, that you can hotspot to, but that may not always be the best option. So something to consider when buying tablets for caseworkers is the option for cellular. So being able to put a SIM card in the device so that device is always connected to the internet. So that's I think enough said for these guys. I think we've all know enough about the iPads now. I know A lot of people I know are using iPads and love them. So, and I think one thing to touch on there too is that this is a preference thing. I think the way we're moving with cloud-based technologies is that you don't need one specific device to use one specific set of software. I know Microsoft have Office 365, for example, that again is cloud-based and is accessible from any internet connected computer, through the cloud, through the web browser itself. So there is no real lockdown of devices these days. You can go either way, really, though I'm sure we've all got preferences there. So just to touch base again on the desktop versus laptop, some of the pros and cons, and I think I will just read through these. Again, with the laptop, you'll see that the very first pro there is its weight and its size. So, obviously it's just a little bit more manageable. You can slip it away in your briefcase or, in your bag there and, away you go. There's not too much setting up and things like that. So that's a massive pro. It's the ease of use, opening up the machine and you're ready to go. There's no, well, while you're on the road anyway, there's no sort of plugging in devices and things like that. And I guess, again, just that, again, the sheer convenience of that. I'll go into some of the cons. I will straight into the cons. So upgrades and repair. So, I touched on being able to, upgrading some of the hardware in a desktop computer. Now that becomes a little bit more difficult in a laptop. Now they're made small. Some of the components that exist out there that you could theoretically plug into these things just will not fit into the unit itself. So there are limitations on how much you can upgrade the device, and yeah, again, the repairs. So if you've dropped the device, it generally needs to go back to the vendor or the IT department for repairs. So it's a bit of a con, but again, I think when you weigh up the convenience of it all, it's still a good risk to take, I guess. Ergonomics as well. Let's be honest. I mentioned again the touch pads. You can't use that for long periods of time. So buying an additional mouse may cover that. But yeah, absolutely. I think I've spent days working on a machine that I've left my mouse at home, and yeah, it doesn't take long before the hand's cramping up. So another thing to consider. And look, price. They're more expensive than a desktop computer. And again, a number of reasons for that convenience, but it's a big investment, I think, particularly if you don't really need the mobility that the laptop is giving you. So back to the desktop, yes, pros, price, so they're cheaper, upgrades and repair, which I've touched on. The components are generally more powerful. There's a number of reasons for that. I think I'll touch on firstly just airflow. These components can warm up in their use, and I think with the desktop computer you've got a little bit more airflow within the device itself. So they can basically put in more powerful components because of that. Some of the cons: size and portability. Yep, pretty obvious. We can't just take the desktop in our bags and plug ourselves in the coffee shop. That would be an interesting sight. But again, yeah, when we go back to our use cases, yeah, there's no need for portability when you're crunching numbers all day in the office. You probably don't want to be doing that on your weekends or at your local coffee shop. Additional peripherals. So again, yeah, we can't forget that when you buy a desktop, whilst it might be that little bit cheaper, you then need to invest in a screen. You need to buy a keyboard. You need to buy a mouse. If you're using multiple screens, you may need a dock. These devices, depending on their use and sort of, I guess, how big they are, that they sit under the desk, so they're not easy to plug in external devices into. So a dock is a handy addition, but again, a costly addition at that. A dock might set you back anywhere between $100 and $200 really, depending on what you're looking for there. But yeah, look, just some basic pros and cons on the desktops and laptops here. some sort of considerations, I guess. Look, some more additional devices. I wanted to give you some sort of practical examples of some machines and some of the indicative costing here. These are additional devices than what we've already covered, so they're not the same as what was back in our last or previous slides. But again, just wanted to give you a bit of a look at, some of the premium type laptops. This is the Surface Book here, standard laptop for mobile staff, something that you could be looking at. Again, the desktop. But I think we've probably touched enough on this. But these are some of the specs that we think are fitting for these particular, roles or individuals in the organisation. So, hardware components. Now, again, I mentioned I don't want to get too technical here, but I do want to give you a bit of an overview of what it all means. It can be a little confusing when you walk into your JB Hi-Fi, for example, and they've got, it's 256 this and 8 that, and so we're going to just break that one down for you, and hopefully give you some clarity around, well, what it all means. So the motherboard. This really is the what they call the main board. Now, this is what everything clips into. So the CPU, which is the i5-7, that's considered the CPU or processor. There's the RAM, short for random access memory, which we'll get into. The monitor would plug into this directly, or into a graphics card that is plugged into it. So depending on whether it's an onboard graphics card or an external graphics card that's been included. We'll talk a little bit about hard drives. Again, these are clipped straight into the motherboard, and the power supply would also, obviously generates power to the motherboard and gives you, gives you power to the device. But again, we'll break down on a lot of these. But basically, the motherboard houses all of the different components that that you need to run a machine, and we'll have a look further. So what is memory? The best way to explain memory, now I didn't make this up myself, I've heard this along the line, that the best way to explain RAM or memory is that it's a lot like a computer's short-term memory. So throughout the day, you'd be opening up different documents, different programs throughout the day, maybe even visiting websites and things like that. But the RAM sort of stores that information away, and what it does is, instead of a computer, let's just say you're looking for a file that you'd opened earlier in the morning, instead of the computer sort of going out to the hard drive and looking throughout the whole hard drive for that document, the first thing it will do is actually look at the short-term memory or the RAM and scan the RAM first, and then look at the hard drive. So chances are, if you've opened a document, and it'll be sitting in the RAM, and it can actually bring that document back to you that little bit quicker. Now, the thing with RAM is that every time you turn the computer off, the RAM is cleared, and you start again when you turn the computer on again. So that age-old, have you turned it on and off again? It's not always, a cop-out, not by any means. It is the quickest way to get a computer back to its baseline, to then address any problems. So when the support guy asks you to turn the computer on and off, don't get too upset. It's just it's the very first step that one would take to try to flush out the RAM, maybe, or just resetting the device to a point in time that it was working more efficiently. So on that, I guess the larger the number, the bigger the short-term memory. These days you'll find that the standard memory in a device is about 8 gigabytes, and with I guess the types of software these days, whilst they're efficient, they can still be labor intensive. So look, if I was anyone wanting to buy a new device, I wouldn't be going anything less than 8 gigabytes. It's pretty standard. And the other thing to add is you can always update the RAM. Now, this is one of the things that you can do to an older computer to make it a little bit quicker or make it function a little bit better. The other thing you could do, and we'll touch on hard drives later, is actually replace the hard drive and install what they call an SSD, which is a solid state drive. Basically meaning that it's a chip and there aren't any moving parts. Accessing the drive is a little bit quicker, but we'll again touch on that later. I know I keep saying that, but yeah, it's all in there. So look, I think we've talked enough about RAM. Short-term memory, the bigger the number, the more information it can hold before, I guess it needs to be restarted. Just to the next slide. So what is a processor? So we touched on i5s, i7s a little earlier. Now, I guess, again, the best way of explaining this is that if RAM, or random access memory, is considered the short-term memory, the processor is the brains of the operation. So this is where all of the calculations are being made by a computer. So, and again, I guess the higher the I number, the more equations or more information can be processed at the same time or in parallel with one another. Now, again, your standard admin person in the office may not need an i7. I mean, an i7 is the top end, and you'll pay for it. It is really for someone that might be dealing with large amounts of data. It could be someone working on large spreadsheets. It's not someone writing a proposal. It could be someone delivering a large amount of PowerPoint presentations that would need the processing power just to manage the task. But generally speaking, most standard staff in an organization, your office staff, probably would only really need an i5 here. I wouldn't bother with an i3. I've popped it in there because they do exist, but look, I don't think you'd go as low as an i3. i5 and i7 is pretty standard, and generally speaking, probably not necessary to go to an i7. So just to cut costs right there, a standard PC, I would look at rolling out an i5 with 8 gigabytes of RAM as a minimum. We talk about the gigahertz. This is the number, next, you'll see this if you're looking at JB Hi-Fi in the specs, it might say something like an i5-6300U. So the 6 is the generation. So it's a 6th generation. So it's an i5 6th generation. And the number next to that could be something like 1 gigahertz or 2 gigahertz. Again, the higher the number here, the more I guess the more processing power the core has. So very simple. I think the higher the number, the better the component. But again, it's more about understanding when you might need that component and that higher spec component, and when you don't. Generally, as a support staff, as a general office staff, an i5 with at least maybe 2.6 gigahertz would suffice, I would think. But again, this is all really dependent on the role and what that individual is doing. And look, again, just touch on power consumption. Once you start getting into a higher clock speed and a bigger processor, it's going to have to draw more power. So it's going to, it's going to cost a little bit more to run. Just something to consider. Graphics cards. Look, again, I don't want to spend too much time on this. They're important, yes, absolutely. I think if you're going to be spending 8 hours a day on your device, then it's probably a good idea to get at least a high definition graphics card. You don't want to be squinting on the machine. Things should be looking blurry. While it's important, it's probably not so important for laptop users because there is sort of a standard that comes with them. You can't go changing the graphics card on a laptop, for example, not any of the ones I would expect that you'd be using in an office environment. So it's not really for laptop. It's more about if you were piecing together a desktop computer, you might just change the graphics card to give yourself that. You wouldn't need to replace the whole device. You just replace the component with a more expensive graphics card and sort of away you go. But for laptop users, you would probably then need to buy, if you were wanting to increase the resolution, you would need to buy an Ultrabook or one of the devices we touched on earlier. One of the premium devices generally have I guess a better standard graphics card. But again, look, in my experience, I think it's very minute detail. I mean, I think it would take a very keen eye to really these days anyway, really see that the graphics on one machine is completely not so great on another. But again, something to consider, but you will pay for it. Graphics cards are probably one of the most expensive components in a computer. So again, weighing up whether it's that important to you and your role. But for some organisations, I expect that it is. Hard drives. Look, I won't discuss too much about the parts. We'll talk about SATA. We'll talk about the SSDs here. Now, I touched on it again earlier around the fact that a solid-state drive doesn't have any moving parts, so it's more durable. It's also takes a lot less power to run, and it's faster. Accessing data is a lot faster. So if you were looking to upgrade a computer, the first thing I would do is upgrade the RAM and put a solid-state disk in it. If you did that, you would feel like it was a brand new machine. So what I would look at when buying a new computer, straight off the bat, and again, depending on the device you choose, is whether it contains a solid-state drive or not. Because you will get the quickest results out of this computer. The only sort of downside to a solid-state drive is that it's a relatively new technology, and you'll only really get around, well, you can get higher amounts, but it's quite expensive, is all I'm trying to say here. So where a SATA drive for 500 gigabytes might cost you $80 to $150. A solid state drive with the same capacity, 500 gigabytes, might cost you closer to $500, for example, or thereabouts, last time I checked. So they are a little bit more expensive, the component. But look, I think if you are buying a new device or wanting to upgrade your old, yeah, absolutely. I'd be looking at a solid state drive there. You'll see these on in the specs when choosing a device. So again, peripherals. There's a number of different types of peripherals. There are what they call input devices, output devices, and input and output devices. So again, an input device is any device that's allowing you to input information or something into a computer. So for example, here we've got the keyboard and mouse. By typing on the keys, you're inputting information into the computer. An output device is something like a screen there that you can see. It's outputting or projecting out the image. And the printer there on the left, you can see in the picture, that's also printing out a document. So it's an output device. The input-output devices like a hard drive there, they are input and output devices because you can save documents to them or store data on a hard drive, and also access data from a hard drive. So this is why they fall under the input-output devices. Just something to consider if you are wanting to purchase a desktop or have a dock set up at work. You are going to need to look at some of these extra peripherals to get you connected and working efficiently. Printers versus multi-function copiers. Okay, so where to begin? I guess we'll just start with the pros. So, heading down to your local Officeworks and buying a printer is a cheaper option in the short term. It's very easy to buy a printer and even plug them in. And it's really good if you're not doing large amounts of printing. I think you'll find if you're printing from one of these devices, it might cost you, for example, 20 cents a page to print. Whereas if you go down a leased or a multi-function copier route, then it might cost something like 5 cents a page. So the biggest thing around buying a printer from somewhere like Officeworks, really, and I'm sure you've heard this before, is how expensive the ink is. It's crazy expensive. I would recommend, if you're going down this road, to buy a laser printer. I think in the long run it'll be cheaper for you when you could print more. But again, the price point in that printer straight off the bat will increase, $200-$300 right there. It does have basic functionality when you buy these devices. You may not always be able to set up things like scan to email. It may not have a scanner at all. And it doesn't come with ongoing maintenance or support. So if something goes wrong with your printer bought from Officeworks, it doesn't come with any support. So if something goes wrong, chances are you'll probably throw it away and buy another one, or ideally you'd have a support team that could assist. But chances are it becomes a bit of a throwaway item in a lot of ways, and just something to consider there. While it might be a short-term fix, I think you'll find in the long run you'll probably end up spending quite a large amount of money either on maintenance or just the ink alone. So multifunction copiers, I think we discussed, cheaper per page for printing. Generally, you can lease these items out. So it'll come, it might be a monthly arrangement that you have with, your Fujis, your Fuji Xerox, your Kaseya. I can never say this word properly. Coursera? Anywho, moving right along. But they will come with support. So, if there is an issue, then chances are you'll have one of their techs come out and support you, throughout the leasing term. There's also options for, staple and binding if you're doing, large presentations or documents, I should say, and you're needing that binding. It's all part of the multifunction copiers these days. And again, good for large quantities of printing. Again, cheaper per page. The ink will last a lot longer. And that's probably the benefits over purchasing a printer from Officeworks, for example. Now, again, the cons, you are locked into a contract generally, and those costs can be expensive. So certainly something to weigh up. That's a bit of a breakdown from me regarding your type of printer. But what you could take away from that, I think, is I would go LaserJet if you can, and try to get a network attached printer. Will just make things a little easier for maybe anyone else trying to print to that device if needs be. Okay, where are we now? Actually, I might just cut to you, Tina, if you're there. If there's any questions coming through, I'm happy to answer any questions while we sit tight here.
We haven't got any questions at this point in time, but please feel free to put any you have in the questions box, everyone.
Okay. So I think we've talked enough about components. It's all going uphill from here, downhill from here, guys. It's a lot to take in as far as the components are concerned. But here's the more, I guess, user-friendly stuff. The software, the operating system itself. Whether you're using a Mac or a Windows device. These are some of the key requirements, I guess, when you're purchasing a device and you're wanting to use it for work. You're going to need to have these things installed. So we'll touch on some of those. So the operating system itself is the interface, is the logging into Windows and having it all there. Now, some people prefer Mac, and that's fine. Generally speaking, I think Windows is predominantly for business, and Macs are generally for design-based organizations. Now, people are probably going to disagree with me there, but for the sake of this conversation, I think overall, I think probably Windows machines are more popular in a business sense, whereas the Mac computers, again, are more around your design-based stuff, marketing and things like that. So um, just on that, I mentioned that everything's moving cloud these days. So there is no right or wrong there. A Mac computer can still access, Microsoft products. Maybe not all, but at least the Office suite with Office 365 and the applications. And most you'll find of the web browsers and things are across platforms, so they can be used on both devices. Really, I think when it comes to the operating system, it is all about what feels right, and what works for you. So, all staff are going to require the ability to use, things like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and Outlook. Certainly the Microsoft Office suite covers that and should be installed on each device. Some of the Office 365 applications in particular will sort of allow you to, things like OneDrive and Skype for Business, will allow you to sort of store a lot of the documents that you may have in the cloud and then make them accessible anywhere, and also Skype for Business for collaboration. So being able to shoot a message over to your colleague and get the information quickly. These are just some of the applications that part of the Microsoft Office suite. Again, web browsers, you'll need those as far as, surfing the internet. Excuse me, I'll just take us back a second. Surfing the internet there. So again, they're cross-platform. You'll find these on either the Mac and the Windows devices. And typically most other applications, including CRM, finance system, websites, social media, survey tools, and e-newsletters will be web-based. Yep. So some of the other things to consider here around I guess your organization and some of the software is really understanding the environment that you're taking these devices into. So we touch on domain functions. So one problem you'll have with a Mac device if you're taking it into a Windows environment, for example, is some of the compatibility with things like print drivers. So a driver is basically installed to allow the software to speak to the hardware, if that makes sense. It's just a little install, and there can be issues that arise with Macs being introduced to a Windows environment. So again, going back to your information gathering exercise, it is, what am I doing with my PC? What is the environment I'll be taking it into, for example? I mean, it's important to know that if you've got a Windows-based environment, that not everything's going to function as smoothly in that environment if you do decide to go down the Mac route. But I will touch on some other interesting things around really understanding some of the software that's included on a device when you purchase it. If you're going down the road of JB Hi-Fi, for example, a couple of things to consider, and we'll touch on that. So I referred to the standard operating environment. So this is something that we would use with our clients. We're a managed support provider, and we basically have a standard image that would be rolled out to our clients, and there's a number of reasons why, but this is pretty much our standard operating environment. So firstly, the latest operating system, Windows 10 Pro. You'll find that a lot of the functionality with the Office suite is targeted to Windows 10, so new features are becoming available. Things like co-authoring in Office 365, so being able to work on a document at exactly the same time and seeing those comments or changes being made in real time. So we always want to upgrade to the latest operating system, not just the features or functionality, but also just security as well. So updates are constantly rolled out to block any attempt at hacking or vulnerabilities in the software. So always good to stay up to date and where possible, update to the latest operating system. Office again. This can be purchased, through our partner Connecting Up for all not-for-profits at a cheaper rate. I think I've got some of those prices a little bit further down. We use Kaseya or TeamViewer, which is a remote access software. So if you've got an IT provider currently offering you support, this is the sort of software they would need to access your computer in case there was an issue and to sort of support you, moving forward. Absolutely things like Kaspersky here or AVG. So antivirus. We're currently using Kaspersky, but there are other options. Have to have antivirus installed on your computer. It's crazy these days if you're not doing that. Really, really risky stuff, and particularly depending on sort of the data you're working with. Just a big no-no really. So antivirus definitely needs to be installed on a machine, and even malware bytes now. Things for malware protection. Now, the difference between malware and viruses. Malware is kind of I guess in essence, it's a virus that's annoying. That it'll sort of embed itself in your web browser and pop up home pages from all different places, or it'll flick up little advertising and stuff like that. That's malware. Whereas a virus is something a little bit more intrusive, that might go in deeper into the system and really sort of mess things up, or even sometimes allow external individuals to access the machine, maybe that through a Trojan, what they call a Trojan. But malware is more about you might access a site and download a program, and then there'll be a little checkbox that says, do you allow us to install this other piece of software? Chances are you don't see it. You click OK, and then every time you open your web browser, you're not using Google search anymore. You're using another random, search engine, things like that. That sort of falls under the malware category. QuickTime, so media player. You may have heard of things like VLC as well. Really, this is just how you are running videos and things like that on your device. So your web browsers, pretty standard now: Google Chrome, IE or Internet Explorer, Firefox, and Edge. You'll find with the installation of Windows 10, a lot of, at least Edge and IE are actually installed with the operating system. So necessarily need to install any additional browsers, though we do, because Edge is relatively new and there was a bit of a transitional period. Excuse me, once again, there was a bit of a transitional period where Edge really wasn't working as well as it sort of should have, and at the time Chrome a lot more stable and compatible with a lot of other web pages and add-ins and things like that. PDF reader, so reading PDFs as they come in. Now this isn't the Acrobat version. That is, you can purchase that from Connecting Up, all not-for-profits, unless this has changed. From my understanding is that each not-for-profit gets about 4 licenses of Acrobat Pro standalone version that can be purchased through Connecting Up for $77, which will enable you to merge PDFs, not just read them, but actually, I guess, manipulate them. So it's the Pro version of the reader, I guess, in a lot of ways. Really worth, I guess, looking into some of the Connecting Up software that's available to you. You'll save a lot of money and I think a lot of time if you can source that directly through them. Adobe Flash, streaming video and audio, PDF Creator. It's a free PDF converter tool. It's a light version in comparison to the Acrobat or the Pro version from Connecting Up. So that's a standard operating environment. And again, having a standard environment on each PC is important because it means that any individual can move from one device to the other and pick up pretty much from where they left off. It's also really good when it comes to training. We're not going to tailor training for each specific laptop, and how it's set up and how it looks. I think if you can get some consistency across the board there, then you'll find that I think is a better approach in the long term regarding training and just usability really in general. So choosing an operating system, again, really what you're comfortable with here. I would certainly be discussing with your IT departments whether purchasing a Mac or maybe a Windows machine is the best approach. But again, you'll find that you'll find that lots of software now is cloud-based, so you can probably get away with it more than ever. But you will find if you've got a domain in the organization. So if you're server-based, you may not connect the Mac to the domain, and the domain might be handling certain activities for you when you log in. It could be mapping your printer, for example. It could be mapping shared drives and things like that, which won't be straightforward for a Mac user under that scenario. However, it is possible to do, but it'll take some time from a support person to configure those things for you. Won't be just plug and play. We've spoken enough about operating systems. I think there is Linux there, but don't expect you'll be really using Linux in a business scenario. I, for one, quite like it, but again, I think for the sake of the conversation today, we'll just talk about Mac and Windows. So, just some prices around some of the donated Microsoft licenses that you can get through Connecting Up. So these are available to all not-for-profits. The Office 2016 is the standard version of the Office suite. So it will have, your Outlook, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote, I think. There are some limitations to the standard version as far as what's available to you, but it is pretty much the full suite, and it's a one-off cost of $38 per license. And that's a single license. So basically, you install it on one computer. You can't, install it on multiple machines. So actually, quite a good price, I think, for what you get out of the Office suite. Down a little further, we talked Office 365 Pro Plus, and this is specifically to Office 365. But these are the donated prices. So Office 365, you can purchase a monthly subscription, $4.40 per user per month, and that basically gives you the whole Office suite that is updated. Let's just say we move into 2019 and Office decide to make a 2019 version, you will get an update and it'll give you 2019. You can install this on 5 devices. It could be your mobile phone, it could be your computer at home, it could be your laptop at work, and it could be another computer that you might have tucked away under the bed or something. But it gives you the ability, or gives you the flexibility, really to work from any machine, and I guess a feature-rich sort of version of the Office suite wherever you go. Now the E3. It includes all of the above benefits there. It's probably not, look, it could not be for everyone. It's a little bit of a higher price point. You can also install it on 5 different machines there. But look, I think for the sake of today, we might sort of skip through that. I'm just sort of conscious of time myself. But look, just some of the options that are available to you, donated from Microsoft to you, and through Connecting Up. Okay, so really looking forward to discussing this with you. The things to look out for when buying from retail. Now, one of the biggest things that I get, particularly when I was working on the support desk, is why would I buy a business grade laptop when I can pick one up from JB Hi-Fi for half the price? Let me tell you. So, firstly, and look, you can definitely go down this road, but there's certain things that you want to look out for. So the first thing is what type of operating system comes on the machine. Is available to you on the machine. Now, if it is home, for example, then if you take that into your organization, you will not be able to join it to the domain, which means you won't be able to log into it. You won't be able to use it really in that environment. And what would need to happen is you would need to send that to your IT guy or your local, computer store up the street to have them image the device with Windows Professional so that you can join it to the domain and, work effectively. So there's a cost in doing that. So while it might cost you it might cost you $300 less than the business grade device. You then need to send it off to someone to actually reinstall the operating system and all of its components due to the limited compatibility with your environment. Going back to that environment, it's very important to understand the environment before going out and purchasing, these devices. So that's one example. The second example is that, when you purchase a business grade device, it comes with a next business day warranty, generally speaking. I mean, we don't purchase devices for any of our clients without it. It's reassurance that if something happens to that device, and things happen, that there will be a technician on site the very next day to replace that component and get you back up and working. And that's generally for 3 years, whereas a consumer grade device that you buy from, somewhere like JB Hi-Fi. I feel bad saying JB Hi-Fi. I really like these guys. But this is just an example. Any retailer, you're not going to get that turnaround. You're not going to get the warranty. And again, going back to what I was discussing around business grade and consumer grade, generally the business grade has been stress tested, and the components are of a higher standard, which is why it's a little bit more expensive. Let's flick through that. It's really good to know what virus software you've got on there. Sometimes it's not really included, or they give you a subscription-based one where, after a certain amount of time, then you actually have to start paying for the antivirus. What else is going on there? And look, another thing to think about is that if you're looking at replacing or upgrading devices in the organization, you can do a bulk purchase and get discounts that way. That's another way of doing it. So replacement strategy. We talked about devices being between 1 and 3, laptops being between around 3 years old as far as their life cycle, and desktop machines being between 3 and 4 as a life cycle. So what I would say here is that it's always good to put in a bit of a replacement plan. So this is, instead of, in 6 months' time, you find that every machine you've got in the organization needs to be replaced and you have to fork out X amount of money. It's really good to sort of take a coordinated approach here and really break down, what devices need to be replaced first, and have a bit of a plan so that you're not just dropping large amounts of money on replacement devices. Just to slowly, gradually do that as the year rolls on. Maybe the grants come in, that you're slowly chipping away at this so it doesn't become a huge issue all at once. What else have we got here? So yeah, again, the problem with older devices is that, once they get a little bit older, they really start to become a little bit more difficult to maintain. So, I'd absolutely want to sort of replace these devices when you can. There's also security risks around running older operating systems and things like that if you're not upgrading. So, absolutely, I'd be looking at setting up a replacement strategy to sort of cover that. So some top tips here for designing a technology solution. Base your design on a future business model. Again, where do you see yourself in 5 years, and how do you think the staff will be working? Determine your requirements for infrastructure. What systems do you need? Are these systems available in the cloud or not? Know your staff need to work and your use cases. So again, going back to the use cases, knowing how they're working and what devices to buy for those roles or individuals. Understand the peripherals you need and factor those costs. So again, we talked about docks and monitors. Just knowing that if you might buy a tablet, but you might have to pay another $300 just to have it working like your older laptop, for example, or give yourself a little bit more flexibility in the way you're using it. Again, explore group purchases with IT vendors. So bulk purchase of hardware, you generally get a little bit of a cheaper rate, and build the business case and compare with other options. So, how you can justify any costs, effort, or change, reduce risk, decrease costs, and improve performance. So, That's it from me. I feel like we've gone over, so my apologies if I've kept anybody. I know there's been a lot to go through, but it's my understanding that Tina can send this slide out to you and the recording of today's session. So, I hope that you've got some valuable information from it. If anyone did have any questions that I haven't been able to answer today, more than happy for you to contact me directly at the organisation here or through the email, and I can work through some of maybe your specific requirements on sort of a one-on-one basis. But look, I think I should probably leave it there. Thank you all very much for your time. I appreciate that. And I guess I'll hand you back to Tina. Thanks again.
Thanks, James. We do have a couple of quick questions, if you're
Okay.
okay to go through them now.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
Helen says, we are looking at networking with desktops. What should we consider?
Sure. So, networking, it's a big one. Generally, with a desktop computer, when you're purchasing a desktop, you won't have a wireless adapter unless you specifically ask for one. So, chances are you've only really got one option. You either install a wireless device so that you can access the network through the wireless signal there, or it's an option where you'd need to have the devices plugged in using an Ethernet cable. So not sure how to answer that question. I'd need to understand more around the environment, but my quick answer to that, and again, happy for you to contact me to discuss further. My quick answer to that is that you'd need to have those devices connected via an Ethernet connection, running back to your modem. I hope that helps. Does that answer your question? It's a big conversation, that one.
It is. And Helen, feel free to contact James directly. I'll be sending out all his details with the slides and the recording as well. So you can go into more detail with that
Yeah,
question
so I
offline.
can
Yeah.
discuss kind of specifics around the specific networking infrastructure you might need. But as far as if you've got desktops, then yeah, it'd have to be an Ethernet connection somewhere along the line.
Okay, we've got one from John. He
Sure.
asks, what about cloud only rather than using Office for Windows? We do use Office 2016 for Windows, but strongly considered going with online only. Is it really
Yeah.
worthwhile for nonprofits, even at the discounted price, especially considering co-authoring works better in the online versions compared to the Windows software?
Yeah, and I would say absolutely. I don't recommend using Office 365 primarily in the cloud. There's a couple of reasons. Firstly, it's actually a light version of the Office suite. It was never intended to be used on a daily basis like that. The reason that the online version of the Office suite it really is around is for flexibility. So it's more around, okay, I'm sick, I've left the computer at home, I really need to send off this email or quickly change this proposal before I send it today. How can I get to my documents and send that off? And the quickest way would be accessing the online portal, and accessing the document that way, making some small changes within the web browser from any internet computer and sending it out that way. So my quick answer to that one is the online version is a slimmed down or light version of the Office suite. It does not have all the functionality that the what I call the standalone or the installed applications on the computer itself has. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yep, and we've actually got a few more questions, but I'll just ask this one last one, and the rest of them I'll email
Sure.
through to James, and you can email
Yeah,
them directly with the answers. So Matt
absolutely.
has asked, do you think that Microsoft Defender antivirus is suitable?
Excuse me, say again. The
Do
Microsoft's.
you think that the Microsoft Defender antivirus is suitable?
Yeah, okay. I don't know how to answer this one. So basically, the Microsoft Defender is it's basically the standard sort of antivirus that comes with the installation of Windows. It's not an additional package. Um, Look, for home use, I would go as far as saying yes. But there's just a lot more to consider when you're working in an organization and how important that data is. Um, so I think for the sake of the conversation today, I don't think it's enough. I think you're going to need something that's a little bit more robust. And yeah, and yeah, look, yeah, no. For the sake of the conversation today, I think you're best off buying a full antivirus package. For home use, however, you could get away with Windows Defender.
Okay, great. Was there anything else you wanted to add, James? And I'll finish off after this.
No, look, I think that's everything. Again, I'm very conscious that I've sort of taken up enough of everybody's time. I just appreciate everyone hanging in there throughout the content. And again, opening up those lines of communication. If anyone would like to speak further about their specific, requirements, and happy to assist where I can. Yeah, that's it from me, everyone, or
Great.
Tina.
Thanks, James. So thank you for presenting today, and thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you've all learnt a lot from this presentation and all of your questions have been answered. If you do have any questions that come to your mind later on or any feedback at all, please send that through to events@connectingup.org and we will answer those questions offline. You can also contact James directly via the information on your webinar control panel and through the slides that I'll be emailing through to you later on. Don't forget that the recording will also be available, so the link will be sent to you via email, so keep an eye out on your inbox. Thank you again for being with us, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you all next time. Thanks, everyone.